Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined. Who knew that a young woman from Canada with an engineering and fine arts degree and who worked in the most advanced data and tech hubs would find her way to veterinary medicine, impacting large animal health in a unique way? I admit that I was fangirling our guest today. I have Dr. Shari founder of CATTLEytics, which combines hardware, software, and system solutions for the animal health industry. She brings together teams of veterinarians and engineers to capture specific data to help make impactful decisions. We discuss aligning career with personal values, perseverance, and calculated risk, and the powerful impact of integrating veterinary expertise with advanced data analytics to improve animal health and farm management. Not only is this conversation a great example of a very unique career path in veterinary medicine, it also demonstrates the pivotal role veterinarians play in diverse industries. So let's get to the conversation with Dr. Shari Vanderpool. You have a very unique start into veterinary medicine. You kind of had a career before that. So I kind of going to phrase this question a little bit differently, but I do want to start earlier into your childhood because I think there were some really unique things about that were a big part of who you are and kind of your journey. So one of the things you shared with me is that you come from a family of very strong women. So do you mind starting there and sharing a little bit about who you grew up in these amazing female role models?
Yeah, I think sometimes you take for granted what seems normal to you as opposed to what's out there. But then sometimes when you drill down, you find really cool things about lots of people's families, which I love hearing. When I think of my grandmothers, I can never relate to the grandmothers in books because we have the grandmother on my mom's side who, I mean, she came from a farm and she used to be the one they'd ask to come out and work with the horses and work with the cows. And she'd ride a horse bareback to like round up she was like a trick rider as a young girl kind of thing. And then I think of my dad's mother, and she was like tough as nails, one of the first females that ran a whole section of the British High Commission. She was like, yeah, they were not out baking cookies. As much as I love cookies, they were both really dynamic women, and they had tough things in their lives that they had to go through. Like my dad's father passed away when he was 3 years old suddenly. So then being a single mom raising 4 kids in an old farmhouse, like there weren't supports for that. And so she suddenly had to go out and get a job. And, the fact that she got to where she was and managed to support that family, it's incredible. But on top of that, I mean, I have 3 sisters and a brother and my parents as well. Like, they're both incredible people. And when I think of, I mean, we talk about strong women, but I mean, strong women and strong men. I think that's the thing is that on both sides, I have a sister who's a crown attorney, one who's a physicist and product developer, one who's an opera singer slash music teacher, and my brother I'm lucky enough to work with, and he's got amazing hardware expertise. So it's a pretty cool family, but definitely, we were very much, I think, shaped by a few things that sometimes seemed hard when we were little, but when you look at it in the scheme of things, I think all of us became really great problem solvers.
Yeah, and at the time when we talked first, you mentioned that maybe not too long before that, you had spoken with your uncle, and he had thought that your mom or your parents had kind of pushed you all to be like these very high achieving individuals. And you said, that's not how I remember it at all. And
Absolutely not. Yeah.
and so I don't know if I had asked this, but it's like, so what did motivate you all to work so hard?
Yeah, it is funny because I can only speak for myself. I think I could probably reflect my siblings' journey somewhat, but I think outside looking in, it's like, oh wow, your parents must have pushed you. And I absolutely didn't feel like that one bit. I mean, I think maybe seeing what they did and what they accomplished and how hard they worked, that was something. But yeah, I don't know. My parents didn't push me to go to university or not to. They didn't push me to choose a program or not. They didn't overpraise me if I did well at a test. Like, I think the thing is that we worked hard and we worked when we were kids. We had jobs when we were kids, and you're 9 years old and you're walking half a mile in, -15, -20 with like, unplowed snow to get to a paper route to go to 300 houses and then walk back. I mean, there were times where it was so cold and it was blizzard-like conditions. And I think I was telling you, I remember taking my scarf off my neck and wrapping around my sister's feet to try to keep them warm because we were so cold. And it was like moments like that where it's like, yeah, I I don't wanna be like this for the rest of my life. Like, I wanna, you know, it's having that reality of, not everything is provided for you, that you're like, "Well, I'm gonna make things happen." And I think that leads to some good things and some bad things. I think it leads to the good things of when you learn how to work hard and how to kinda hustle, you're always gonna be like that. I'd say the bad things that leads to is at times I took sort of more of the safe route as opposed to more of the creative route. And in some of those instances, it would have been better to actually like embrace the skills I have versus, okay, I know that this is going to lead to this, which is going to lead to this sort of security. So, I mean, all of these things have positives and negatives. But yeah, when I talked to my uncle, I was like, no, I'm not going to be caught out in like poor winter boots in a snowstorm. That's why I'm going to university.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think you had said that your parents ran a nonprofit, and so with nonprofits, you're probably not the most lucrative job, and you're working hard, and kids see you working hard, and a lot of times they really respect that, and so you took that, going forward as working hard is a good skill to have. And yes,
Hmm.
as you are working a job, you're also like, I might want to do something that puts me in a different position than walking in snow. And just for people, in case they haven't picked this up yet, you're in Canada. That's why it's so much snow. Here I am in Georgia, so very different. But no, and I think that even though, maybe in hindsight you may have done something a little bit different, maybe been so risk averse, it allowed you to develop some skills that I think kind of work out really well in the future as we get here. So, kind of piggybacking on that, you knew you wanted to do something where you might have a little bit more financial security. And so that's kind of going into your decision making. So, when you were starting to look at university, as you mentioned,
Hmm.
what kind of intrigued you about engineering?
Yeah, and it was so random, like, or at least I feel like it was, but I knew I loved making things. I loved making things. I was good at math and science. I was good at art and English. Like those were the places where I really excelled. And I remember a guy named Irfan who was also in my class and who was like also we always did well at the maths and the physics and all that kind of stuff. So, you know how you kind of keep tabs on people. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I applied to engineering." And then I was like, "Oh, maybe I should do that." Yeah, that sounds pretty good. And I remember talking to somebody who went to my church who studied engineering. And I was like, "What is that again?" And it's like, "Well, I'm going to make things." And I'm like, "I like making things. That's good, you know?" And my first choice was actually to go into architecture, but talking to my parents and like I would have had to move away from home. It would have been really expensive. What kind of jobs would have been out there? And the engineering seemed to be like, you know, more of a direct connection to actually being able to be financially secure, to actually do something related to what you're doing. Because you do look at, what percentage of people that study this thing actually get to do the really cool part of that thing. So that's where that took me, but it was like a series of chances almost. And the university I went to that was close to me, they had a great engineering program too. And I started off there and I was like, "Ugh, but I'm missing art." So they had an engineering society program where you could take kind of like a core minor in a subject that you want, as well as a whole bunch of sustainability courses. So I had to do the whole portfolio interview, all of the things as if I was to be admitted to art, but I was the first student to be able to take a minor in fine art too. So I'd be down in the one set of rooms doing art critique with all these like painters and then walk across campus and we'd be, doing calculus on the other side. So it was a really cool mix of things. And it was a lot of fun. And I'd say both subjects areas. I mean, I still have really good friends from both areas, but I couldn't imagine how some of the skills I picked up in both of those sides, plus the sustainability courses, would actually figure into the rest of my life.
Yes. That's why I'm like grinning just listening to this because I know what's coming. I was like, this is so neat how this all builds on top of each other. And it sounds like you were pursuing your interest. That's where you started. It wasn't like you miraculously knew that this is what you needed to do. It was you were leaning into what you enjoyed, and it starts to kind of build. And I also like that you embrace two very different facets of your interest too. Both are creative, right? Because engineering, you're building things, you have to have an element of creativity. And then art is also it's a little bit different, but I love how it can complement each other when you can embrace it and be able to bring in both of those perspectives in a situation. So
Hmm.
you're pursuing engineering. You also have built up this very creative and the sustainability piece is really neat too. And
Hmm.
so you're going off into the world after college and you get your first jobs. And it sounds very technology focused as well. So how did you get your first job and how was that going?
Well, it's so interesting because so many of the decisions at that point in time, and I maybe kids are less like this today, but I feel like I fell into this and then I fell into this and then this just happened to make this. Whereas I feel like this, like later on in life, it was like, okay, wait a second, let's take stock and let's actually make a plan instead of sort of taking what comes to you. And I ended up sort of falling into doing I went overseas to do some of my engineering degree. So I moved to England. Again, I really had no idea what I was doing. Showed up with a hockey bag with all of my stuff. I lost my winter coat. It was a long story. Had my watch stolen. A taxi driver dropped me off. I didn't have the full address. I was standing by the side of the road next to a payphone, which in England you can't use a payphone unless you have a card. So you can't even put money in it unless you like get to a store where you can use it. So, I mean, it was a miracle I even like made it into the place I was supposed to go to. I ended up studying at the University of Leeds, loved my time there. And then again, a sort of fluke trip to my friend's house in Northern Ireland, met with some people that were hiring there. And then I took on a job in the summer. And then after I graduated, doing data mining at a startup at the University of Ulster. So I ended up working at a startup in data mining, something again that I would have never really gone for, but it came to pass that I ended up doing that. And what a random place that, I would start because actually a lot of my work now connects to that, first job working in a small office, not too far away from where they made the Titanic in Northern Ireland during one of the most troubled times in Northern Ireland as far as the peace process. So while I'm just trying to get my first job down, we were stuck at home for 2 weeks due to riots. Like it was pretty intense. So yeah, such an experience, like such a really unique experience.
For a lot of us who have no idea about the technology side of things, do you mind elaborating just a little bit on data mining? Like what is
Oh
that?
yeah.
And how might that set you up for the future in your current role?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the examples that I heard I heard them using back then was that they talked about beer and nappies. Nappies are diapers, right? So what you find is that when a man goes in to buy diapers, he has a much greater chance of also buying beer. And they don't necessarily know why. They don't know, you could start to theorize like the reasons around it. But the fact is, when they buy the one seemingly unrelated thing, they buy the other. And it tends to be that specific diet demographic and those two specific items together. And it's something that you probably wouldn't tease out even by guessing or by, any other method. But when you're looking at a massive amount of data about what people are buying at a shopping, a supermarket, you can start to draw these connections between these items. Sometimes they're related, sometimes they seem unrelated. And so they created an algorithm that I understand is now purchased by IBM and used by them. But they were the pioneers of that type of technology where they could look at giant amounts of data and draw these connections between these items. And so we'll touch on this later, but the connections to epidemiology and veterinary medicine, these areas are huge right now. But they were doing this back in, 19, I think the company was founded in like 1998-ish. So doing a lot of this work before it was quite so popular.
You're right. Like data was a huge topic. Maybe at OpenAI kind of like overshadowed it a little bit, but we were talking a lot about data and how we're leveraging it. I worked at
Mhm.
Mars there for a while, and they were really heavy leaning into data. So you're right. And then as you were talking, I just thought, I feel like someone had told me that there was like a big tech boom in Ireland at a certain
Mhm.
time. Am I getting that right?
I mean, there is and there still is now. I
Okay.
mean, because so many of those tech companies, I mean, there's tax reasons for them being located there right now. But because of that, there's so much tech happening in Ireland. And, where you start to have those companies based, you start to have almost like this university style mentality where all these smart minds, sharpen each other. And it's a really exciting place to do work right now. And there's some great innovations coming out of there. There always has been.
Yeah, yeah. Even more amplifies what you are able to be around at that time as well, and bringing in that knowledge. So, okay, so you were here at this data company. What
Mhm.
happened next?
Well, my sister was expecting a child, and her and her husband were excited to be welcoming their first daughter. And I just had this moment where it's like, am I really going to live my life fully in parallel? Like it really made me take stock of like spending that much time away from family and missing these events and I had previously gotten a job offer. I got a few different job offers at IBM, and I was, you know, they were still in contact. They were still kind of checking things out. And then I was like, well, I've got an open job there. I'd be closer to family. Like maybe I should really, head home as opposed to getting really entrenched in life there. But I was pretty entrenched there at the time. And so, yeah, I moved back and I took a job at IBM. The very first day of the job, this decision I'd like agonized over which team I was going to accept, I finally decided, and I was like, yes. And the very first day, I was like switched. The manager met me and he's like, "Oh, I'm moving." So it was like, well, I didn't really need to agonize over this so much. And I think that's often the way. The decisions you find so hard become inconsequential anyways. And then I started off there as a developer and then went on to become a team lead for one of their biggest products. So there was elements of that were so cool. I remember after a dentist appointment I needed to release something. So I went down to the coffee shop nearby and I was just about to put out one of their fix packs. And I think it was a service pack actually. And the person next to me I saw was refreshing the page that was going to be the service pack. And I was sitting next to him about to release the service pack he was waiting for. And I was watching him and he looked over at my screen and I was like, release. And then it appeared on his screen and he was like, it's you. You're the person that and it was like this moment. And that was one of the cool things about working there is the impact you had. And I'm sure people who work at Microsoft, like they're, maybe not so much when a fixed pack doesn't go well, but yeah, that connection you have with all of the people that use that, it's pretty cool. There was so much to learn there and they have so many different areas. Like you can continuously expand your horizons at a company like that.
So this sounds like you're really enjoying what you're doing. How do we eventually get to veterinary medicine? What's the bridge to that?
Well, I mean, it in all in like it was a great job. It was a great job. It was a solid job. There were great people I work with. I think what I got to is that I'd sort of let these decisions trickle down and I'd found myself in a place that really didn't connect with who I was. And so even though it was a good job, it was a good team, the person that I knew that I was, which was a creative, artistic person connected to nature, loving agriculture, loving farming, loving that sort of pastoral upbringing that I had, Instead, I was finding myself in an office building in a city, and it was just so disconnected from who I was. So I started really thinking about, who I was, what I enjoyed, all that sort of thing. And the one thing that just kept on coming back to me was that, in a career like being a veterinarian, especially a large animal veterinarian, I would get to do the things I'd like to do, like the problem solving, the connecting to people, solving problems that really made a difference for people, being able to think about systems, being able to be really creative and out of the box. Because, so many times you're just kind of like, I've been given this situation. How do I fix it here? And I wanted to make sure that this was something that connected with me. So I started spending 1 day a week doing large animal vet calls. Originally, that was actually something, I don't know if it's like this in your area, but it's actually hard to get a large animal veterinarian to take you on calls. They get so maxed out by externship students and so many people that are like, "Oh, that sounds nice." That they're just yeah, another student coming along saying, "I'd love to ride along with you," is not quite as much of a gift to them as you might think, let's say. And so there was one veterinarian who was actually the student to my dad's cousin, who's also a vet. And even though he was probably in his 60s and she was, getting towards 80. And so I tried to call, I tried to get through, wasn't really getting calls returned. And then I talked to my dad, and my dad is like one of the most determined people I know, like just this calm determination. And he's like, "Well, have you really tried?" And then I'm like, "No, no, I haven't really tried." So I brought a book. I think I had an exam, or I had something coming up. So I brought a book with me. I went to the clinic. I checked to see if he was there. And I said, "Well, I'm just going to wait." And so I sat there and in their waiting room, hour after hour after hour ticked by. And it finally hit around lunchtime. And I'm like, "Okay, well, like they said that they thought he'd come back around lunch." And I was like, "Oh, did he come back?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah, he did, but he went in the back door and he's already left again." And I was like, I was into like hour 5 at this point or something.
Oh,
And I was like, "Okay, well," and they're like, "We don't know if he'll be back for the rest of the day." So, you know, so I finally left, but that Saturday he called me. And from then on, yeah, every Saturday we'd go out and I'd do his sick cow calls with him. And I saw so many farms, so many different situations, met so many people. I play Irish music too, so I got to know them from a musical front. And so he'd have all of his like farmers around, and they'd have some sort of traditional kind of music thing going on. So I'd join in there, and it was just totally fun. Sometimes really awful too, all the things that you see in veterinary medicine, right? And I found that every week, that was the day I look forward to.
it sounds like you were really finding what connected you. But then again, that bigger picture of also what I think large animal veterinarians do is a
Uh-huh.
huge human connection because of the food supply on top of it. And I remember that was something also that you had realized. And I have a note here that you said, something about in Uganda, that's when you realize that, food supply is just not a given that you'll have food. Did you go to Uganda or did you just use that as an example?
Oh, I did. Yeah. I
Oh,
did one of my rotations in my
oh,
final year in Uganda. And yeah, I mean, not only is it not a given, but I think as vets, I don't know if you're like this, but we're like, "Ooh, that could have parasites. Oh, I see." Like you see parasites everywhere after you've seen parasites, right? And the average person is like, "You crazy," right? And we're just you start to see what you've seen, and that lack of safe food, worrying about children playing near pigs, or, and larval migrants causing epilepsy and things like this. It's really, you know, these things that are outside the boundaries of where we start to think are real issues, and we're only saved by them because we've actually dealt with them and we've put processes in place. But then we get this sort of like very laissez-faire attitude towards these things. Like, I don't need to vaccinate for rabies, but because rabies isn't really a thing. And it's like, well, yeah, it was a thing here. We did, it's gone. And now we've stopped and it's coming back. It's one of those things where some of the good situations we have is only because of so much hard work. And when you don't have that history of that hard work, or when you're in a place where that's just not the case, it really makes that real again, you know? And so having a safe food supply is something that we for sure take for granted here. Absolutely. Having just food on the shelves. People during COVID finally started like getting a bit panicky about that possibility. And it's like, well, let's not take this for granted. Let's support our local farmers. Let's support these supply chains because that's not always guaranteed. And historically it hasn't been.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we need a constant reminder to that. And again, that
Mhm.
question is going to come back up again, appreciating the dairy industry, even among our colleagues in veterinary medicine. And so you realize that you've potentially found the route that you identify with, and it's going to ask you to go into veterinary school. So that's, 4 years of your life that you are going to go into. So how did you kind of think through that? Did you have to explain to other people like what in the world you were doing and what was that kind of like?
Well, I find that when I'm going to make a big move, I don't always tell lots of people because what you find is that some of the people, no matter what you say, if it seems extreme, they're going to try to say, is that such a good idea? Is this right? And sometimes that energy just stops you from making any sort of, moderately risky decision. So instead, it's like, okay, well, we'll choose the people you trust and ask them. It's kind of like don't ask clothing advice from people whose clothing choices you don't like. So for a lot of those things, if you go out and pull people in your life, there's like everybody, you're going to have different places where you're going to ask their opinions on, but maybe not across the board, or else that'll just sort of put you into a place of inaction. So, yeah, I don't know that I told a ton of people necessarily. I mean, they started figuring it out when I started making moves, but I think the thing is that, to some people then watching it outside in, it seemed really risky to leave a really settled career in which I was fairly senior to go and do something where I'm starting at the bottom again. But that being said, I don't think it's ever a risk to realign yourself with your interests. And when it comes down to it, I had somebody tell me, like, because you were talking, I heard so many people saying, oh, I don't want to go to like med school or something, because in the end, it's going to be 7 or 8 years. And I heard somebody reply to that, well, you're going to be 8 years older no matter what. It's not like time's going to stop. If you come out of high school and you go to med school, you'll either be 24 and a doctor or 24 and had 4 years down with a job you hate. Like, don't think of school time as lost time if that's what you love. That's, and so that really made an impact on me, trying not to see that as lost time, but seeing the opposite, time spent in a job that's not connecting with me, that doesn't make me feel like I really want to run at it and feel so passionate about it. That is the lost time, you know? And when it comes to the risk, right? Yeah, it seemed risky, but I am all for really calculated, careful risk. I didn't quit my job in a rage or something, right? I spent years, spending a day a week doing vet calls. I spent this time in between to consider what that looked like. I set up a job in between getting my prereqs and actually then getting into vet school so that I could take enough time off to get the prerequisites without, having to just quit my job cold. So I set up a job with a gap in it. I'm saying that because I think there's probably people in their lives that whether they're a vet and looking for a change or the opposite, like where it seems too risky. And I think it's way more risky to stay put.
I love that. So, kind of what you're describing is a little bit what they call the sunk cost fallacy, right? Is we are making decisions for our future based on something we've done in the past. And what's happened in the past is in the past. If you've realized something that is going to be the right direction for you in your future, you need to
Mhm.
make decisions based on that.
Mhm.
And so I love that realization because that can be really hard to
Mhm.
leave things you spent a lot of time on. You've mentioned risk a lot, even from the beginning. And so I think if people have listened to the story, you did have a very calculated risk. So you did put that in. And yet, I don't want to belittle that there was some bravery involved in it as well, and especially in large animal medicine. And it does sound like that's kind of where you found your calling and you kind of stuck with that. And
Mhm.
we definitely need a lot more support in large animal. And then, did you go straight into dairy right after vet school, or how did you transition after vet school?
So I knew the other thing I knew, and I didn't really say that, is that I knew when I started that I wouldn't wanna do necessarily a typical vet career.
Mm,
So that was also something different too, because when I got into these situations, I would I would get in there and I'd start to look at the data and the systems, and that was the thing that made me the most excited. And the typical large animal like dairy vet role has an elements of that, but usually it's more, you're doing herd healths all the time. You're doing, it didn't really have the elements of that I knew that I would want. So when I was in my fourth year, in around there, I went to Cornell and did Summer Dairy Institute. They have an amazing program there. And I met a few people and they also saw me because of the questions I was asking, right? Because I was asking questions from an engineering perspective about animal health that made them start to think, there's something else going on there. Um, and that's really where I made the connections with the people that we would set it up where I would be a consultant and they would be my clients. But really at that point in time, I was still like, maybe an accomplished person on the engineering software sort of front, but not necessarily on the vet medicine front. So I started out sort of on day one running a company and taking on, one of the most forward-thinking veterinary groups out there, which was just amazing. But they were actually more focused on beef, or I would say totally focused on beef. And so that was just such a good pairing because it gave me a chance to see how they did things, understand how they got to the point where they were. And the mindset was so connected with the mindset that I had. Key Jim founded it. And I mean, I've heard this said so many times that he was working with feedlot owners and people like that. And he would say, well, when I look at financials, my best day is their worst day. And
yeah.
we have to change that, Like, I shouldn't be making money when they're doing poorly. We need to revamp that so that when they're doing well, I'm doing well. And that was really the principle behind how they set up their operations. So then that success brought success. And that really meant getting into research, getting into prevention, doing all of those types of things in veterinary medicine where you're looking at the groups, you're looking at what's effective, you're comparing it, you're doing some really cool science. And so being able to then support that as both a veterinarian and an engineer, implementing some of those programs tied to, triggering disease situations, those elements, it was a really cool place for me to really take off.
Yeah. And so, yes, sorry, the dates do align. So you graduated from Ontario Vet College in 2014 and then started your company at that same year.
Mhm.
And I know that this client that you're talking about is probably the one you were talking about. Like that's was one of your biggest clients, and they actually end up getting purchased by like an even bigger billion-dollar company. Now, at the same time, did you also have smaller clients where you were able to see more of the small farm operations as well?
Yeah, I did, and I mean, I wasn't also disconnected in my area too. There's a ton of dairies, and dairy was always something that was close to my heart. So, I mean, so I would have connections on both fronts and spend some time in dairies in upstate New York and places like that. But yeah, it was definitely there was a range of experiences in that. But it both wasn't traditional veterinary medicine, but it also wasn't the route that a lot of people go, which is more of a corporate type route. And it gave me a lot of creative freedom.
Yeah. well, there's that creativity again. You're being able to pull it back. And it's great to have resources to be able to use that creativity. And I think you said, once the big client was purchased, you got really serious about building your own software. And so how did that start? What were the problems that you were starting to solve? And what were
Mm.
you excited to use your creativity to start building your own software to make something really uniquely yours?
Well, back when I was a student, I remember one of the farmers I got to know more through music again, um, asked him to take a look at his data. And I was there in the spring looking, I still remember sitting in his little office looking through his files, and I was taking them onto my machine and then doing the system modeling that I would have done on an engineering project. So you create equations and you use different inputs to actually create, an equation that would represent, for instance, how much milk they were going to make, what their somatic cell count would be, things like that. And the models were good, like within about 3%, except for the fact that when I looked at October the year before, um, suddenly the models sort of went off, his milk tanked compared to my model. And I was trying to figure out what happened. Like October, it's not super hot. They're not moving around animals. They didn't have a disease event. Finally, I talked to him and I asked him, why did that change? He couldn't figure it out. I looked back and I said, 2 years before you had a similar drop. And then he looked at the dates and said, oh, that's when I switched over to green corn silage. So he ran out of corn silage and then he had to he either had to buy more feed or feed silage that hadn't properly fermented. And he knew that it was a bit of a hit, right? Like he knew that would be the case, but then he didn't want to buy overpriced silage from down the road when, the prices were at its highest. And I said, well, that's great. But did you realize that the model doesn't come back on track until February the next year? Like it wasn't a blip. It was months and months of decreased milk because what you were doing is affecting those early lactation animals and then their entire lactation was decreased.
Mm.
And I think it worked out to be about $30,000, right? And that's the place where suddenly when you can quantify it, when you can say what that is, it's like, oh, maybe I'll make a different decision next year, but before that, he couldn't make a specific decision about this management choice because he knew it was a little problem. He just couldn't put the numbers behind to see how much of a problem it was. And that was really the place where it's like, okay, we could do so much, especially in dairy specifically because it's so complex. And some of these models really help make those decisions. And at that point, I'd already started working on these concepts and these ideas, but then life just got so busy. I put it on the back burner. And you're right. It was that moment where it's like, yeah, I really got to make this happen. And it's funny how sometimes you need those little bits of a push or a motivator to make something that's just an idea, actually a reality. And that's where we really started designing, we have to do all the things that a system does, but really our goal is to help dairy farmers or those people that work with dairy farmers to be able to say, how can we optimize all the elements of this complex system in a way where we're not just giving you information. Our staff know dairy. We're here on the ground. We can talk through things either with your staff or with yourself to come together to some answers. So it's a very collaborative process, but we wouldn't be able to do that next level of answer finding if we didn't have the platform that we built.
Yeah. And, talking about the collaborative nature of the operation, I think is really important because a big part of what I took away when I got to see behind the scenes a little bit of CATTLEytics, the system, is that a lot of it is improved communication on top of it. So not only are you data collecting and being able to present better information to make decisions, you're also able to connect everybody who has a touch point or an impact on that animal together. And I think that's really important. I mean, I always think about sometimes the biggest barrier of, solving problems is poor communication. And so
Mm.
the fact that you're able to do all of that with this, and maybe, and you can correct me if I took that a little bit differently, but I thought that was so neat in that, you're connecting data with the appropriate communication so the right decision can be made by the right person at the right time because you're connecting everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And that collaborative piece is so important. When we go back to my time way back in data mining in Belfast, one of the big takeaways I took from some of the people that started off that initial algorithm was that yes, you can throw all this data into a black box and make connections. But those connections often are not very good connections. Even if you find them, they don't always stand up over time or in different situations. And they also take a very long time to actually mine through and get. But if what you can do is you can start with an expert who understands whether it's buying patterns or in our case veterinary medicine, and you can say, well, I know this because I have seen this. Let's see if these connect, right? Then you can actually get to much more powerful answers much faster. And the thing is, as much as I might be, an expert at being myself, a veterinarian, the dairy farmer I'm working with is an expert of their farm. They know what they've been through. They know what problems they've had. And there's elements of that I'll never know, Oh, this is when we changed the feed. Oh, this is what we did so when I'm able to talk through things with them, and that's often what I do is talk through their operations, they're like, this is the problem, I think. And then this is my theory. And then we're able to talk through that theory, test out that theory, and say, actually, we're not seeing a connection with that, but we are seeing it with this. Any ideas why? Any ideas why breeding's so terrible on this day? Oh, well, our barn is so busy and we have this going on and we have these people and we have, you know, sometimes they're able to get to those connections that you just can't on your own. So that collaboration piece is massive.
And, your software is a little bit like turning this dairy operation into a video game. And how do you win is kind of what you said. So I think on top of that, you're able to continually add on ways or like things to look at. So back to the sustainability piece, you're able to assess those things as well because you're able to know how to look at data, collect data for one, but then also analyze it and use it to make decisions. So I think sustainability is huge. The how the people operate, how you communicate with the veterinarian. And I'm sure we could do an entire episode on this question. So you don't have to go too deep on it. But as I was thinking about it, because I think you did do a whole lecture on AI and how it's impacting dairy farming. But do you
Yes,
mind sharing just a little bit?
so we use AI, we implement AI, we teach about AI. I think the elements of that are one, helping your dairy clients be educated about it. What tools are out there? What tools are out there that can help them write their protocols, can help them connect with their staff, can help, get over language barriers. There's a ton of stuff out there. And just knowing what's out there and how to use it effectively is important in that communication. Then as far as how we use AI, we've got a large language model that's part of our platform, and that helps answer questions, connect into the data in a very dynamic way so that you can ask questions and it'll get you answers specific to your herd. But also when we're doing data mining or we're doing, data analytics, we have a very specific way that we use AI and machine learning in that, how I said that we look for the connections first. So when we find those connections, then it's taking those connections and putting it into a machine learning model to then tune that further. So when we're looking at the outcome of breeding decisions, or we're looking at how to best tune your voluntary waiting period, or what's best as far as, when to put a cow into close up, all of those things are things that people just kind of, there was this paper that went out here, or I'm going to kind of guess based on this, but being able to get actual answers to those, that's so key. And so using farmers' own data to be able to generate these answers gives them answers that they've never had before. So yeah, we use it in multiple ways, but I think it's just making sure that you know what it is, you're educating your clients about it, and and taking the good from what it is. If we take what's given to us and then complain about it, I feel like that's way less effective than actually being part of the design of really good AI.
Yeah. And what a great example to kind of implement onto other aspects of veterinary medicine, too. And I, again, just want to say how awesome I think this is. And I'm not the only one who thinks it is. You are constantly winning awards. I'm trying to keep up with you as you post. I think it started with the Farmer's Choice Awards, and then you went overseas to participate in some competitions. I think the last I heard was like a semi-finalist in, is it the Odlum Brown Forum pitch program? So, I mean, you're doing fantastic. How is that going? Am I up to date?
Yeah,
What's the news?
yeah. No, it's pretty cool because in each one of these areas, first off, I mean, I think we all, it's one thing to win the award for the award, but it's another thing when that this brings attention to the entire team. It brings attention to all of the work that we're doing. It brings attention to the collaborations we have with dairies, the number of people that when I call up and say, "Hey, do you want to work with me on this?" and say yes, you know, that's the real thing that I'd love to highlight in these and what we're doing in such a foundational industry. Like we all should care about where our dairy products come from. And people care and they don't know what to do. Then if you don't know what to do, we're doing something. Come work with us. Come be part of this. Come collaborate with us. And I think these awards just really make that all the more easy because it puts a spotlight on that. I mean, Singapore was amazing. It's not exactly a dairy hotspot, but it was a lot of fun. I'll be traveling to Vancouver as part of the Odlum Brown pitch competition there. But some of the things that make the most difference to me really are when one of our clients sends me a message or a screenshot saying, "Hey, we're using this. Hey, we use this for task management." Because we have a task manager. And now that we can use photos, look, we're getting our milk room cleaned and we're getting this shelf up and we're doing this stuff. Like the work is happening. Or, those are the things that for me, like really are amazing. But when people are I think as a large animal vet, for a long time, I kind of worked in the shadows a little bit. And having those moments where I connect with people and it's like, we do care about this. This is important. It's pretty amazing. And I hope it brings good things to all large animal veterinarians, all veterinarians, really just highlighting the work that we're doing and why it's important.
Yeah, and again, this is why I talk about so frequently how I love how important it is to have veterinarians in so many different places, sitting at
Mhm.
so many different tables, because we bring such unique perspective, including into the dairy industry, which again is, I think what you're doing is highlighting the importance of having veterinarians there because
Mhm.
you're able to make a difference. I had another guest call what she was doing being part of the solution, right? Not complaining. Not we're doing something about a very important part of our economy, our animal health, public health, all of that. And so, coming back to a post I was talking about, I think you were featured in an article on the Ontario Vet College, and I don't even remember what the comment was. I may not have even looked. I think I just got so distracted. But, someone had apparently said something derogatory about,
Mhm.
the dairy industry. I'm a positive thinking person and I like to see possibilities in everything. So sometimes I forget that people have a definite perspective.
Mhm.
So, I mean, to me, this highlights how important it is to have veterinarians in this industry making a difference and making the world better. But do you
Mhm.
have any other thoughts about just how important it is to, have veterinary professionals be a part of this?
Yeah, and I remember so Ontario Veterinary College featured me in one of their magazines, and it was a big deal. I was super excited by it, especially because I was one of the class presidents there, and
Oh,
I feel like when I was in connection with the administration, often it was like representing student opinions. There was times where I brought things up that students were concerned about that there was a difference of opinion. So, but then really being represented by my university, OVC, I was like, wow, that's so cool. It felt really great. And they posted on their page, and I was like, this is awesome, But then the first comment that came up was like, I think it was to the effect of, why would we ever support anybody who's working in dairy, or, this is kind of what's wrong with the world moment. And it was like, really? Like, if you don't drink milk or eat cheese, or, like, I think there's tons of things we could do to decrease animal usage and animal products. But when it comes down to it, you know, ice cream is still being made every day. Do you not want us to move towards a better way of doing that? So I get that there's a difference in opinion on that being a food source, but the fact is, it is a food source. And do you want people advocating for the animals involved, or do you want silence? Like, what is this world that you want? And I think that's the thing, is that we're sometimes in contentious places, whether it's a small animal vet who has to put an animal down and people don't understand why, or wherever you are, and you feel that tension between sometimes a public perception and what you think is really right on the ground. And I think we have to stand our ground on these, because we are representing the animals, involved, and we have spent the time and the education to understand, what's good. And coming from an uneducated opinion, potentially, about some of these things, or even an educated opinion from a different place, it's really one of those things where, if we consistently bow to public opinion, then there's nobody that's going to be truly standing up for the animals that they've spent years and years learning about to best represent. So yeah, it was one of those posts where it was like, oh, come on, really? Like vets have to have such stamina to continue to stand up for the animals, that they work with every day. And then to tear somebody down, it's like, I don't know if this is doing what you want it to do moments. But I mean, that's something where, like, for one person who's like that, there's another 1,000 that aren't like that. And so that was my own fault for reading it on and being like, right? Because really, it's taking that broader perspective and saying, okay, that's how I got connected to you. Like, I think that's one of the big themes of this, is being able to take something that maybe isn't a great situation and pivot it into something really good.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think colleague to colleague, we should support each other. But I also see it as a sign that we do need to talk about this more. We do need to talk about how important it is to have veterinarians in all these aspects, because wherever animals are, we need to be. And I mean, we even talk about it in corporate medicine, right? If we have a bunch of business people who do not know anything about veterinary medicine making all the decisions in this veterinary company, that's not good either. We need veterinarians there. So I want to thank you for what you do. I can't wait to continue to follow you and see what else, we do to make this a better world and all corners of it. And so finally, I just want to ask my last question is, what is something you're very grateful for right now?
Yeah, obviously my family. I mean, when I come back, I've got 2 little girls. I've got a 5 and a 7-year-old, and they're amazing. And I mean, coming back and spending any time with them just resets you. You can't take yourself too seriously. You can't, anything that you deal with during the day seems minimal. And I've got an incredible husband who just makes so much possible. So super grateful for my family. But also, like, in the scheme of all this stuff, like talking about what we do as a profession, there have been so many people who've come alongside what we're doing and said, hey, let's do this here together. Can I help you here? I've got a connection here. Like, that piece of it, that community. And it's just incredible, because we are doing cool things, but we want to create more of a community. We want to connect with people who feel very like-minded. And that type of a community has really allowed us to do so much this past year. It's amazing.